are we, as a regional district, free to do whatever we want by exporting our waste? It's only what gets buried is the operating permit. We're allowed to figure it out on our own?
The operating permit, thank you for the question, it's a good question. The operating permit is related to our current landfill, and this analysis is what to do if the landfill is full. So we're not bound anymore with the operating permit at that point in time. We will need, if we were to site a new landfill, for example, we will need a new operating permit. And that will be part of the process moving forward.
Right. Any further questions? Director Toth.
Thank you. More just a comment than anything. I'm glad to see this coming forward, and yeah, as was mentioned, it'd be really nice to have been looking at this 10 years ago, but here we are. It is what it is. I really hope in the options that are identified, waste to energy is not one of the considerations. I know that there are emerging technologies out there that reduce the GHGs from these things, but I should hope that other directors have the same sort of concerns around emissions from waste to energy that I share, but I'm willing to look at all the options.
All right, anybody else? All right, so look for a vote on the recommendation on the floor. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you, GM Rosenboom. Moving back to item 3, federal gas tax, Annex B. And over to Tina.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this particular report is to provide some framework for the Federal Gas Tax Community Works Fund and how it's allocated here through the regional district. The gas tax agreement is a tripart agreement of which we have signed with UBCM, who administers the fund. We receive funds in advance in about an average of 644,000. Those are distributed directly to the electoral areas based on a per capita basis over and above the base funds. And so there's a subsequent report on this agenda reporting on how much each area has. Staff went out and canvassed the other regional districts on whether or not they had policies of similar nature, and those particular policies have been factored into some of the suggestions for today's report. And so included, we also have just a framework draft policy outline just for discussion purposes. So today is just really to talk about what some of the considerations the board would like to see. We've also included some of the recommendations that have come forward over the recent months related to potential funding of regional projects through the gas tax program. And that is for the project at the Gibsons and Area Community Center, as well as that for, I think, Spraw Kids there. So we have some items for consideration here, and turn it over to the committee for any questions they might have.
Director McMahon.
Yeah, I was just wondering, couldn't we partner with municipalities if they use their gas tax fund?
Yes, we could. It just really depends on which regional service the project was for. It would also depend on if it was a partnership based on 100% funding. So it would be yes, but then whatever, if there's any shortfalls in any funding would need to be considered further to that. So yes, we can. There's nothing precluding us from partnering through sort of a funding agreement.
Follow-up, Director McMahon?
Yeah, and would that include other possible partners like Scredo or Sunshine Coast Tourism?
I'm going to say yes, we could. it really, but then again, it would depend on what the project is. So things like, which stated in the report here, do we actually have a regional district service for that particular project? So it would depend. And of course, that's when, what was proposed, staff would go back and, obviously consult with UBCM, ministry, et cetera, to bring options to the board for consideration.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I have just a question. I think when I've been looking at some of potential gas tax projects, there appears to be opportunities to use gas tax to fund the majority of it, but still get some donations from whether it's a not-for-profit that's fundraised or a community member that wishes to donate to start it. So can we actually pile gas tax on top of, let's call it, other donations or other grants?
So I'm going to address on your last point first, because as have been presented, there are programs through grants that we are not able to use gas tax. There are what called stacking rules, and so we are not able to do that. In regards to combining gas tax with other sources such as donations, whether or not they're cash or in kind, yes.
So just a clarification on that stacking rule. Some grants do allow stacking, right? So I guess it depends on what we're looking at using them for and what the grant parameters are, whether or not the gas tax funds could be used. And each grant, has their own criteria.
I think that's a good point universally, meaning what is the project, what's being considered, and then we would have to come back, explore all the options and present them for consideration, because they would all probably be very unique.
Director Lee, follow up?
No, that was, you hit my second question, so thank you.
Okay. Director Hiltz?
I'm unmuted, thank you. There's 4 words I'm really drawn to in the report, and it's twice. It says there is a need. There is a need for a policy. I'm going at the board is there to do the what and the why of things, and staff does the how. That's kind of how I understand policy to be working. So this gas tax money is to be a resilient and flexible funding process. So it would seem that the SCRD hasn't been able to expend the funds. So this is essentially to increase the efficiency and direct this funding to a certain place and to assist staff in moving these things along. And it's essentially to add clarity to how we deal with this money. Is that really why we're dealing with this policy?
So I think one of the comments I've made in the report is that these funds have typically been used for active transportation. And I think there has been a past practice where it was somewhat, majority of the funds were used for that. So in the absence of, having the active transportation agreement with MOTI, those have been on hold. We've also had emerging needs through whether it's community-driven initiatives, Grantham's Hall, and no real source of funding, and obviously this is eligible, it's been able to facilitate those projects for moving forward. So I think there needs to be some clarity on what the board wants to use these funds for. Do they still want to just allocate them to the rural areas? So then staff would have more clarity on what funding options to bring forward. And I think that, not to preempt what you're going to see at part of pre-budget, but I think we have to open our considerations because there's more needs now than there are funds available to do things. And so I think this is where using gas tax, the community works funds to fund some projects is is going to be needed as a source of fund. So I think it's clarity. It's clarity on how you want to use it. How do you want to allocate it? Do you want to use it for regional projects? It's quite clear on what the requirements are for gas tax. So I think within that framework, I think it's a good jumping off point to get that clarity.
Okay, Director McMahon, and then I'm going to be on the list.
Yeah, did Director Hiltz have a follow-up?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and so I'm also thinking that the reporting requirements there's some transparency and to say that we're doing a good job with this money is part of this process. The transparency to the people who the jurisdictions that provide this grant. So there's a reporting up. So this will help with that process as well. The documentation aspect of is that part of this, the reporting up?
Not necessarily, because the reporting is very prescribed. But most certainly we have had some projects that have gone through feasibility and have not progressed. And so one of the stipulations is that it materializes into an asset. So again, that aspect of the reporting and how we use the funds, I think, would be improved.
Okay, I've got Director McMahon, and then me, and then Director Pratt.
Okay. While I'm a big fan of active transportation, in my area, most of the easy shoulders have been paved at this point. There's only two that I can see that would be, real possibilities, and one of them, which is Reed Road, which I'll say again, Reed Road, is problematic. It's very problematic right now because Modi doesn't want to play. So I am certainly interested in looking at options, particularly if we can use some of this money to leverage grant applications, which would be, awesome. I did have a question about very small projects. For instance, if we have the opportunity to push through the Inglis Connector Trail, that's going to be a project under $10,000 and something that could be accomplished very fast. So is there any flexibility in here to allow for small projects to proceed without being in the budget and without having some complicated planning process? Because you don't want to spend more money planning the project than you do actually putting it on the ground.
Tina?
I'll only address that legally we cannot expend funds that are not in the financial plan. So we have to amend the financial plan in order to do that. But it doesn't preclude us from doing those types of things. And I think one of the things that, I've heard discussed by the board is, look, we have a lot of projects on our work plan. And so sometimes, I think one of the comments was chasing grants for projects that aren't even on the work plan. So we just have to be mindful of those types of things. So if it fits within a existing need or work plan item or board related strategic initiative, and it moves those types of items forward, I think that's where we're best positioned to use these types of funds. If I could, Chair, just make another comment, which is a lot of community groups or a lot of regional districts are using these funds to partner with community groups. So maybe to Director McMahon's point, that's ways to leverage capacity is by using community group resources to do things. And I think that's been discussed here. So that's also for consideration as part of the policy, is to provide some framework for that.
Okay, I'm going to have you turn to page 17. So I've been around the regional district for a while, and I notice that active transportation is only one of the categories that these funds can be used for. And if I just read this list, there are a lot of projects on here that are more future oriented that funds could be expended on. And one that I know Director Pratt has had an issue with in the last while is commercial boat launch. Number 2 is short sea shipping. And it's infrastructure related to movement of cargo and passengers around the coast and on inland waterways. It says without directly crossing an ocean. I don't know how we get around that piece, but because we're on the ocean. But there's broadband connectivity, drinking water, wastewater, solid waste. There's all kinds of categories on here that have never been explored the regional district with regards to these funds. Given, we had a presentation last night at our council meeting by TRAC, and they've met with MOTI around the funds that MOTI has available for highway improvement. And they're actually looking for us to provide the priorities for them to do these shoulder widening areas, different kinds of things that will actually address some of the active transportation. So I think we need to take advantage of that in our areas, but also look at where else these funds could be used. And then to Director McMahon's question, I actually brought that up during agenda review as well before, when you said, could we partner? Definitely. I mean, one of the projects that has come forward is the solar panels on the rec center in Gibsons. I mean, that's something that all of us contribute to, or the majority of us. Tina corrected me. The majority of us contribute to. So that should be would be a project that potentially we could look at having funded with gas tax. We as a municipality, if we contributed, it wouldn't necessarily have to come out of our gas tax funds. It would be a contribution from us based on numbers or whatever, but our funds could come from wherever as long as we contributed to that, because those kinds of projects in the long run save all of us money because we're all contributing to those facilities. So we'd have to look at how we put something like that together, but I think it's something that we want to consider going forward. All right, I have Director Pratt and then Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll springboard off of that because you touched on some of the things I wanted to talk about around. It feels like historically the Regional District Board has been focused around the active transportation piece and the widening of the provincial roadways, which having been around this province quite a bit, I'm actually, I've always been surprised at how narrow our shoulders are on any of our provincial roadways. So I personally have a bit of an issue providing our gas tax funds to widen shoulders that should really be a provincial responsibility. I do believe in active transportation and providing safe walkways, but I think our gas tax funds can be used in a different way. I've received a lot of comments in my community about, when are the roadways going to be widened? When are we going to have more pathways in Half Moon Bay? Because some of them had been started, and then the UBCM legal decision came around the building infrastructure with our gas tax funds that we did not technically then own after. So I had been informed by the previous director for my area that that an agreement had been solidified during his term in office. However, we don't have anything as of yet. And I'm just wondering if we do, so this is my question for staff, if we do have any ETA on when we will have an agreement with MOTI for any of these walkways along the highways that we are looking for. If there's been any further movement on that. Because, we've heard about the pilot project over on Vancouver Island. and we wait, and we have projects that have been in the hopper. I'd like to, we have a lot of funds, and as we go through this agenda and go to the report a little bit later, there's a significant amount of funds that's remaining unspent, and it's when we have projects that are worthy, shovel worthy, then we should be doing them. So I guess my question is around the ETA on the agreement, if we have any update on that.
Tina, any, or Ian?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Staff don't have an ETA, but we'll note that connection with Modi to try to drive this forward has recently been reestablished, and staff understand the priority of getting clarity on this. Thanks.
Follow up, Director Pratt?
No, I appreciate that. It's when I spoke with our new manager at our new regional manager at Modi, he wasn't even aware of the pilot project on Vancouver Island. So so there's some communication within the Modi department as well about what's going on within other areas, and we can't be I'm guessing we're not the only jurisdiction that has this issue. Just hearing from our AVICC partners in March of last year about what was going on, and their frustration on waiting to hear how things were going. So thank you for that, GM Hall.
So Director Lee, Ties, and then McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. Couple comments and then a question. When I realized how much gas tax money had accumulated, I actually got my community partners together, and I asked them what projects they would be interested in funding if they had money, such as gas tax, and for them to set priorities on those projects. I'm in the process of it, but I'm probably at the third meeting now with them. The comment is that in Area A, the shoulders are really hard to pave because they're non-existent. We don't have any shoulders. The ditch is on the side of the road. If you go off the pavement, you're in the ditch. So there is no shoulders in the communities where we would want to have biking and walking paths. So it's extremely expensive in rural communities to put walking paths on the side of the highway. You got to rebuild the road. But I asked them what they wanted to do, and their projects. They reviewed what was eligible, or what they considered to be eligible for gas tax from the documentation we got, and they moved the shoulder paving right off the list. So that shows the community understands the cost and believes that Modi should be doing it and should be redesigning the highways so that it's done when the highways are built. That's really their comments. The other thing is that I like the way the allocation is, but I also think that we must be free to partner with other regional districts and municipalities. We got 4 years more of this collecting gas taxes, and we don't know which projects are coming and which ones are going to be super important. So we need the freedom to do this very similar to what we do with the grant made, and do what's best for the communities and the coast. So I like that part. And my last question is, we're allocating by the 2016 census. Is there going to be a new count coming up anytime soon? When's that happening?
I know that it's 2021. Okay, 2021 is the new census, and the numbers will be released in February of 2022.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Director Ties?
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to plug the any kind of bike park initiatives, especially during time of COVID. It's a great way for the kids to get exercise in a COVID safe way. So maybe not so safe for, you know, skulls, bones, and such other things, but it's great. It's a great way to for kids to you know, burn their energy. So I think there's one initiative in Sprockets happening, and the RCCA is trying to get one off the ground behind their hall. So both of those are on SCRD land, and it'd be a great use of gas tax funds.
So follow up on that, are those projects actually eligible, Tina, given the parameters around, you know, what the funds can be used for, and do we have a function?
So there's only one particular motion related to the Sprockets, which is currently being explored through staff, and a proposed initiative would be forthcoming, and our staff report on what the options could be there. So again, Sprockets is under the umbrella of the community parks function. So the answer is yes there. The second mentioned one, I don't think we have anything online to that. And I think this is where some of the consideration should be discussed is if there is a desire to use these funds more like a grant and aid process, we really should discuss further how we want to administer, because that is not part of this. And I just am cognizant of the staff capacity. And again, there's a subsequent report to the grant and aid policy on the same agenda. So, and also just from my CFO hat, there are so many regional district needs in, I'm just going to say wastewater is one in particular that's very rural area specific. And as we know, those many of those services are very financially constrained. So if staff were given sort of an AOK to go and look internally for projects, and of course always try to leverage them with other funding sources, I don't think we'd have an issue going off and funding those projects.
Okay, Director McMahon.
I'm just wondering if there will be an opportunity to review our active transportation infrastructure in each area, just to see what we have, what condition it's in, what other projects have been, you know, circling that people are interested in, what's there, what's easy, what could be done, and set some priorities, and then we'll have that covered off. Because I don't want to entirely abandon our active transportation network. It's very important to people. And yes, Modi ought to be doing it, but guess what? They're not. So I'd just like an opportunity to look at the situation, at least in my area. I don't know how the directors feel.
So, Director McMahon, you might want to reach out to TRAC, because I know they've done a lot of work on what's available, what's not available, have identified areas that need to be done to make continuous routes, that kind of thing. They might have some of the information you're looking for.
I was thinking of it more from a regional district perspective.
Right.
Like, what projects do we have on the books? Is there a plan? It's been a long time since the Parks and Trails strategy. That was back in the 2000s sometime. I don't like going at things piecemeal. Mm-hmm. I would feel better if I had a little list of priorities somewhere that had been, you know, identified as doable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, does staff want to weigh in on that?
I can, Chair. If the director's request through a board direction is to provide information on the current the current situation on the ground, staff could do that. In terms of a plan, with the conditions imposed by the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure for the granting of licenses or permits to construct that require very specific standards to be achieved, I think that any plans that we used to have, which would now be a few years out of date, would need to be reviewed for feasibility. And certainly if any cost estimates were associated, those would need to be reviewed as well. And it's worth saying development has occurred in the ensuing couple of years, so confirming the priority or suitability of any particular facility should probably be undertaken as well. And while we have been working with MODI and UBCM on clarity about how to proceed with these two services, 665 and 667, which are our bike and walk path services for areas A and areas B through F, there hasn't been an allocation of resources to those services. So if work to undertake a review of past plans or create new plans is required, then that might be something where resourcing would have to be contemplated, and that would be a financial plan amendment, and we'd probably be talking about a 2021 budget proposal, I would think. Thank you.
Follow up, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to get into a large planning exercise because I think we've got enough on our plates. On the other hand, a number of issues have come to me, and they keep coming at me. There's one subdivision where a path was agreed to and never built, and neighbors are asking what the heck happened here. And another one where there is a right-of-way, and there was a path, but the neighbors have been allowed to close it, and apparently with the FCRD's permission. So I have a bunch of these things, and they keep coming up, and I just would like some organized way to go at it, if you see what I mean.
So you're looking for some clarity on questions from the community on the active transportation routes or not in your area.
Yeah, I guess I would just like to review them and discuss the status and whether we think we're going to do anything with them or not.
Okay. Maybe staff can mull that one over and we can come back to that. Director Lee, Director Hiltz.
Thank you, Chair. I did have a note on this on page 14, it talks about responsibility and procedures. And I noted that who puts the proposals forward is actually missing in that list of things to do, which is basically why I was discussing what I did. Because it seems to me we have to decide whether we solicit proposals and ask for a certain level of detail, and then work, put it in the budget and work with staff to A, see if it's realistic, and B, see if the detail's right, and C, how the heck do we kick it off and do it. I don't know if that's something that needs to be in the practice, I guess, is kind of my question on the whole thing. Or do we just leave it up to the individual directors to work with their community organizations and bring the projects forward and say, you know, here's the priority list. Can you review and tell us whether it's practical and whether it fits and whether it's possible and how much staff time we need to get into the budget? So those are my thoughts. I'd be interested in what we could do to make, if we need to make it happen, and if so, what can we do to make that happen?
Before I go to Staff Director Lee, which section are you referring to on page 14?
Responsibilities and procedures, item 7.
Right, so under staff, it says A, develop eligible proposals to present, should say to the EA directors. So what your question is are we looking to staff to come forward with this, or what is the role of the electoral area directors and the community in putting this together? And how would that be reflected in here? Is that correct?
Yes, you hit it right.
Okay. Staff?
I think what's being contemplated here, and I think this is a good policy conversation, which is what is being contemplated there is essentially a solicitation, if I'm being clear, to community groups on what projects they see could be used for this. And that would be a fundamental change of what we currently do. And I think if that is what is being asked to be considered, then I think we have to come back as staff and have a conversation as to what that would look like. Because would it be outside of the grant and aid policy, or would we then clarify a certain amount of funds that are included in this particular pocket that would go, or are you assuming that 100% of the funds would come back? Because I think we need clarity on what that process would look like, as well as how many funds would be allocated to potential community groups. And then we would have to create a whole new program. So I think if this is what other committee members want staff to explore, then I think, putting forward a recommendation on exploring what that would look like, and staff would come back at a subsequent meeting with an outline.
I don't think that's what Director Lee was saying. So I'm going to clarify this with Director Lee. I think Director Lee was saying he'd like the community to have input on what they feel the priorities for the spending of the funds would be. So do we spend it on wastewater treatment plants in our area? Do we spend it on active transportation? What are the priorities? Not, this is a project that we want to see happen. And then that would come to staff to look at, does it fit within the funding model? And how would staff take that on? Potentially with soliciting funds from the community or other in-kind work, but it's not a community-led project. Am I correct in that, Director Lee?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, Tina?
That adds some clarification, but I think there has to be some parameters on what that would look like. Because in soliciting community groups, do they understand all the various community, so all the needs in the regional district? So in soliciting community groups, I think we have to be very, mindful of what we are asking them. Is it what do they see the need in their community? Most certainly, but do they understand all the services that the regional district provides and maybe the needs in various communities? So I think those would just be some of the considerations we bring forward as part of how we would frame this. And then again, would it be 100% of the pot? So how would this program be outlined? And I think that's just what I'm saying, is that based on what's envisioned, how do we want to proceed with that? How do we want to provide some framework to that conversation with the community?
Okay, I'm going to throw in a piece that we do in the District of Seashell, which may give some other another lens on this. So one of the things that our staff do is each year they go out to the community associations prior to budget, and they meet with the community associations and find out from them what they feel the priorities are in their area. They do some very high level numbers, put some very high level numbers behind that. And then those come forward to us during our budget process, just as all the recommendations from staff do. And we vote on whether or not that's going to go into the budget or not. And because we work then with staff around what we see the priorities in the district to be, and whether or not this is a high enough priority at this time to fit within the funding model that we have. So in this case, what could happen is each of the electoral areas could solicit from the community projects that could potentially fit this. Staff would have to look at it and say, does this fit the parameters or not? If not, it's not even considered as part of the budget process. But if it did, then again, that would be something that would have to come forward and maybe be included or not, but that would again be looked at inside of the overall vision for the budget process for that year. Just another way to potentially look at it. Director Hiltz and then Director Ties.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to frame the last bit of discussion about the prioritizing of the projects. And for me, the 6.2.3 does a nice job of prioritizing how to free up this pot of money for our uses. So overall, I like the draft budget or the draft policy. I think it's going to accomplish the goal of cracking open the funding and getting and setting the priorities. So for me, the strategic plan is where we do this stuff, right? This is what guides the whole ship, is the strategic plan. So and I think it does strike at the balance in that each EA director still has autonomy and discretion in their funds. And so for me, the policy gets this thing moving. So the only thing I don't like about the policy is one word. One word is, and this is a recommendation that I would like to, it's on page 12 on the purpose. And the language is fair and equitable. And through a strategic planning, we talk about an equity lens. And I understand equity. Fairness is kind of a bit more ambiguous and a bit more subjective. So one of the things that people have said to me over and over and over and over about the regional district, it's not an efficient system. So I would like to put efficient where fair is. An efficient and equitable system. Fair, I can't handle. Equity, I get. I want some efficiency with this allocation of the money. So that's the only thing I would like to change about the current draft policy, is change fair to efficient.
All right, Director McMahon.
I believe this is coming back to us, so I wasn't going to get into wordsmithing. In general, I'm pretty happy with this. I had a few grammatical, questions for clarification, but I wasn't intending to go there today. If we're going to get another kick at this, in regards to Director Seeger's suggestion about approaching community groups, I can't make up my mind whether that's opening a can of worms or whether it would be another way to approach budget consultation, which is a perennial problem that we have, because you invite people to meetings to talk about the budget and they stay away in droves. So I'm on the fence about that, but this is coming back to a future meeting, is it not?
Staff?
I think part of the purpose for today is really just to talk about what some parameters of the policy. Staff provided a draft because sometimes visual is helpful to see what some things could be contemplated. I think it would be helpful if there is some feedback in relation to what's here, or if there's things wanting to be added or subtracted, or I think the comment about the purpose statement is helpful. So most certainly any feedback we receive will be coming to a subsequent meeting to present for hopefully final ratification. But if more massaging is needed, by all means, we'll get it till it's meets the needs of the board.
All right, Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I'm following up from the staff recommendation where it goes, and that the recommended changes be incorporated. So I'm suggesting a recommended change. So I think that's what staff was asking. Look at the policy. What do you think about it? Give us some words. And I'm more than happy to make a motion to change one word. I'd like to move it in that direction, motivate this policy forward, and to put some efficiency language around the regional district. I really want to see some efficiency. And because that's what I keep hearing from constituents. They want efficiency of spending of their money. And so I'm ready to make that as a motion, to make it as a recommended change.
Okay. We'll hold that thought for a moment and see if Director Lee has anything further to add, and then we can craft the motion. Director Lee.
Well, I wasn't really ready to start actually crafting the motion. And
Are there any other changes you're looking for at this
I
point?
see nothing wrong with fair. If we want to put efficient, fine, but I don't understand how this would make something more efficient. So I have difficulty with that. So it's okay to put efficient, but I need some examples of what would become efficient when we put the word in here in this policy. It's confusing me quite a bit. I could be quite efficient if you guys give me all your money and I could get all my projects done.
Okay, Director Hiltz.
Yeah, so that's what it is. This policy is to efficiently use this money. It's been sitting in the bank, sitting, accumulating, and not getting used. I don't find that an efficient use of money, right? The federal government says, here's a pot of money that's flexible, predictable, and goes for more years. So use it. So that's where the efficiency comes from, is to get this money out. So I'm just trying to line up with the strategic plan, the equity piece, the equity lens that we have, and that's, if you want to have fair and efficient, I just want one word in there, wherever it fits. But the purpose is, that's why we have policies, is to make these things efficient, to give staff clarity, to give the board clarity, to give the public clarity on what we're going to do with this money on their behalf. And so that's what I mean by efficient. And yes, if we all had our own pots of money, we could efficiently spend, but this is a collective pot that the government gives as a one pot, and then our policies to divide it into the regional district areas. So collectively, the government says, deal with it as one pot, and then it's up to us to see how to equitably distribute it within our electoral areas. So that's my understanding of the efficiency aspect of it.
Okay, so I'm going to come to your point, Director Hiltz. If let's look at the purpose. So there's two parts to that. One is the distribution, and one is the expenditure. And I think you're talking about the expenditure. So the first part says a process for a fair and equitable distribution. And the second part says to define a process for expenditures. And I think it's the expenditure piece where you're looking for efficient expenditures of funds, which I think would address Director Lee's question and comment. Would that work for you? Okay.
Sure. Yeah. So you're looking at a process for efficient expenditures of funds.
Yes.
Yeah. I see that works well.
Okay, Director Lee, does that address your question, concern?
Yes, it does, but I would think that if we're going to say that we want efficient expenditures, we would then need to define what we believe efficient expenditures is. In other words, you got to spend the money every year, or you got 2 years to spend your money, or we'd have to put something like that further in to define it, I believe.
Okay. Director McMahon.
I just had item 7.1.3C. I didn't understand that sentence. Approved contribution agreements with non-project organizations received CWF monies. Some clarification on that. There may be a typo in there. I'm not really sure. That would be helpful. 6.2.5. I think I understand what it means on the sixth reading, but if it's possible to make it a little more funding for projects from eligible outside agencies will be considered if there is available unallocated funding. I guess I wasn't totally sure what eligible outside agencies were. Perhaps, I don't know, if, policies don't usually include examples, do they? But sometimes it's helpful if you can try to picture what that was. Those are the main ones I had.
Okay. Are those clear to you, Tina?
Yeah, one is a typo, and then clarity on 6.2.5 is this is to some of that generation of discussion on whether or not we want these funds to be available to community groups, and if that was a desire of the committee, then we would then bring a subsequent procedure to that. And eligible means, of course, the regional district can't do if we're entering into a business arrangement with a group, like that's not an eligible agency. So we could change the word agency to eligible partner, or community group, because again, we would have to make sure that there's certain parameters that we could actually do that sort of partnership agreement with them.
Yeah, partner works better for me because agency sounds like it's a government agency or something.
Mm-hmm. And partner also could be District of Sea Shelter, Town of Gibson's.
Yeah, an agency does work in the case of MOTI because that would be an agency, but partner, they're a partner as well. So we'll change it to partner.
And further to that, if I may, a partner could also be a not-for-profit group. So to touch on Director Lee's point and Director McMahon's point, if I was to put on my not-for-profit hat and I was a not-for-profit group in Director Lee's area that had some money that I would like to put in, that we had fundraised into a project that's actually a SCRD related project, let's just say it's a trail or a park project or an active transportation project, and I was wondering if the SCRD would like to partner with me to move that project forward, and further, since I have some money, would gas tax funding be eligible to be used for this project? You could actually crank that through this framework or this policy and get some pretty good direction as to whether or not A, is it eligible? B, is there unallocated funding that the SCRD could bring to bear on it? Does it match the SCRD's strategic priorities? So is it something that we could pursue? Is it something that gas tax funding could be used for in partnership with the other thing? Would we be able to partner that with potentially additional grant funding? And could that make it through the whole funneling system and end up becoming both a budget proposal and with staffing, the required staffing allocation from SCRD to partner properly? So there's a lot of good direction in the policy here that goes beyond actually just for gas tax funding. There's good direction in this policy that helps with any partnered funding ideas from community groups or another jurisdiction, another municipality.
Okay, any other input into the policy? And then I'll see if Tara actually has captured any of this in the recommendation. I don't see anything else coming. Oh, Director Tiza, do you have your hand up there?
No, it's okay. I didn't want to get into the weeds.
Okay, Director Lee.
The thing that's always been in the back of my mind as we go through this discussion is that whenever you have a single director or a single area proposing something, we all got to be convinced it's the right thing to do. So we still always have that governance capability to ensure that any proposed project fits with the good of the SCRD. So I think that's an important thing to remember.
Good point. All right, Tara, what have you got for us?
A process for efficient expenditures of funds.
Okay. I think we've captured them. So there's a recommendation on the floor. Would someone like to make that recommendation? Moved and seconded. Now this is electoral areas only, voting on this. All those in favor? Tough one, Director Lee. All right. That's passed. Thank you. Moving on to item 4, Annex C, pages 21 through 24. And this is the report with the fund update. Any questions of directors? Seeing no questions, I'm going to move on to number 5, process for establishing community or police-based victim service, Annex D. And Sherry, are you speaking to this?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. This report is coming forward at the request of the board in order to set out the legislative process to establish a new community or police-based victim service. Staff are seeking direction whether to proceed with the establishment of a service as well as confirmation of a timeline. Should the board decide to move ahead, staff will bring a budget proposal to round 1 to establish a fund for the feasibility and for the costs of the AAP.
Thank you. I'm going to weigh in here. I circulated some information that Councillor McLean actually did some research on. And his proposal was that when we look at establishing this service, we actually look at establishing a service that all the municipalities and rural areas, electoral areas contribute to. So it would be a coast-wide function. So something like police-based victim services would be an example. It could be seniors planning table. It could be youth funding. And then those organizations who are providing coast-wide services, and some of the examples he put forward was where it was 3 areas at once that are getting service. It's not just one. But that's something that staff could look at. It would have us as a group coast-wide look at funding services that are being provided by the community for those initiatives that are impacting the whole Sunshine Coast. It would also save time for those groups where they come to Seashout, they come to the town of Gibsons, they go to the SIGD, they go to regional district. So they're doing all of these applications for this funding. It could be something that we could, if we did a coast-wide function for this, it would also then change what they would come to the district of Seashout or the town of Gibsons and others for funding, because they'd be looking at one. So I like that. I like what he's put forward. There's some more work that has to be done around that. And I think that would be part of the feasibility piece that Sherry's talking about. She's nodding. All right, Director McMahon, Director Hiltz, and then Director Tighe.
I definitely support that. We have these little tiny services, and first off, I don't like creating more and more services. I really don't like creating a service for another thing that's being offloaded on us by senior government. We are not in the business of policing in the Sunshine Coast Rural District, and we shouldn't have to be. However, if we had a flexible service that we could use to meet community priorities while still advocating strongly to get the proper funding from senior government that they have, abandoned us on, I could get behind that.
Okay, Director Hiltz?
Yeah, I'm gonna fall in line behind this one too. The way I'm framing it is a service versus sub-programs. Like as an example, in solid waste, we have a solid waste service, and within that we have a recycling program and a green waste program. So the relationship between the service and the programs that are within that service. So I would like to see that within the scope, which is how to frame this community service, which is a regional community service with programs within that. I don't know how that works, but yeah, I'm definitely in line with that. And I have a question about funding this proposal, so that might come after. So I'll save that question. So if staff has some comments about the difference between a service and programs within a service.
Sherry?
Thank you, Chair. So that is definitely something we would have to contemplate during the feasibility phase. The general advice from the province is that the service, it can be broad, it can be narrow, but it must be clearly defined and understood in scope by all the participants. And once we come up with some form of definition, we would also have to set out expectations around service levels, cost recovery, and then once a bylaw is drafted, the municipal inspector would have to approve that. So we would be in consultation with the province as well through this process, but those are all things we can definitely explore.
Okay, Director Ties? And then Director Pratt.
Yeah, I also want to voice my support towards Matt's idea, and I think it makes sense on many levels, and I like the way that the discussion's going. Of course, our grant and aid policy is a difficult one to administer and to adhere to, so we'd be adding another piece like that. But I think ultimately it will make our grant and aid process easier to have that service in place as well. And we could potentially also reduce some of the budgets in the grant and aid because of this. So I think it makes sense on a lot of levels.
Hey, Director Pratt?
Thank you. I'd like to voice my support as well to proceeding with the feasibility and going forward on this. But at the same time, I'm going to echo some of the previous comments and just my extreme displeasure with the federal and the provincial governments downloading of services and failing to meet the needs of our residents in some of these social services areas. We, as local government, our mandate is somehow becoming broader and broader and broader when it really there are services that need to be that are within the scope of the feds or the province, and they're not being met. So the continued advocacy piece needs to happen as well, and I am concerned that we are moving on this path, but I don't see another. I see the need for it. And we're hearing the pleas of our community of needing that additional support, and so I think it's something we do need to move forward in a next step with.
Thank you, Director Lee, and then Director McMahon.
When I read Matt's proposal, it made a lot of sense to me, but I think the devil's always in the details. And I wonder, it sounds like we've got some services that already fall into this kind of thing, like community schools, for instance, and grant and aid. And so I guess I would need to see what the service definition was and what the funding formula was. But I'm in favor of us exploring that and spending time because it basically on a high level, it makes a lot of sense. So I think we need to explore it and see if it works for everybody.
Okay, Director McMahon.
Occurs to me that being a regional district gives us scope for almost unlimited mission creep. However, I am in favor of exploring this. What I'm wondering is if we have a motion that we can draft somehow. I hadn't had Director Seegers prepared anything per chance.
No.
Yeah, we're going to need a motion, and I'm not sure what it is.
Okay, I think there is one on page 25, Sherry might be able to give us some guidance around any kind of modifications that we need to make to that to address what we're talking about here. I'll leave her with that for a second. I'll go to Director Hiltz.
There needs to be something in the recommendation about a budget proposal. That's the other part about this. So, which is in the report somewhere. If we want to do this, we need a budget proposal. So, that would be part of the recommendation. So that leads to the funding of how this is going to be funded in terms of the feasibility and staff time with the preliminary budget there. So the piece that drew my attention is on page 27, a temporary feasibility service through taxation. That's in my looking through SCRD language, that's not and because we also have a function 150, which is a regional feasibility, which has some cash in it. The service grid also lists 151 to 155, which are electoral area feasibilities, which don't have anything in the financial plan. So I guess it's, how is this going to be funded, and will this kind of just come out through the budget process? But so budget process or budget proposal in the recommendation, which will include how this would be funded.
All right, Sherry, over to you.
Actually, I think I'm going to refer that one to Tina.
Okay, Tina.
So, yes, those particular functions have been created based on past feasibility analysis that have been done. And so those are the mechanisms for us to be able to recover taxation through those particular areas. So I think one comment that has been had, which is the first proposal is to have a regional service, which means there would be all levels of participants. So that would be one of the questions we would have to propose as part of the feasibility. But as such, it's chicken and egg, meaning we have to, at the start, determine, is everybody going to participate in the feasibility? Or is it just going to be certain jurisdictions? So I think that's one of the questions we'll have to ask as part of the proposed initiative. Who's in, who's out? What is the scope of what's potentially once? And then I think it says this in the report. So if a service was successfully established and all the participants were determined, those feasibility funds would be credited in the feasibility service with which we taxed, and they'd be transferred over into the new service and recovered. Sometimes it's an in and out because it's the same participants, but maybe some people in the actual establishment of service do not participate after the feasibility.
So to Director Hiltz's question, are there funds in the feasibility function currently that could be allocated to do the work, and we could see a budget proposal come forward for that under that function?
So the answer is actually no, because the board has proceeded, I don't think so, because I think the board has proceeded with the potential of the water sustainability, the governance. And so I think we'd have to revisit that as part of the budget deliberations, because I think that was one of the deferral items. So if it was deferred, those surplus funds from the past feasibility were used to fund the new feasibility for water governance. So again, that would have to be contemplated. So maybe we'd have two feasibilities and that one service going at the same time.
Okay. All right, seeing no further questions, I'm going to go to Sherry and see if we have a recommended recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. So what would be helpful is to have some direction from the board whether or not we should proceed with establishment of a service. And I would request, if it's not specifically police-based victim services, that something more general be indicated, such as a contribution service to fund social services or whatever the board is envisioning that we will be pursuing. And that a budget proposal be brought forward to round one budget to establish a fund for the feasibility costs as well as the costs of the AAP.
Okay, Tina?
So So we're not actually determining whether or not we're going to create a service, because that's actually the point of the feasibility. So I would just suggest that we change that a feasibility for the creation of a fill in the blank, so it would be feasibility, because that's what's to determine what is to be created next.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just caution that we don't say we're going to establish a service. It's to explore establishing a service for X purpose, and we need that defined for the next steps.
Right. So we wouldn't at this point give direction to proceed with an alternative approval process, for example, because we don't even know if we're going to go forward with the service and what that would look like.
Correct.
Okay. So I'm going to look to Tara. No pressure.
Thank you, Chair. So what I'm understanding from this is that staff report with a feasibility study for the establishment of whether it's community or place-based victim services, I don't think that's been determined at this point, and that this be brought forward to either pre-budget as a proposed initiative to review that, or if it's to round one budget as a budget proposal. There's a couple things I'm not clear of.
Mm-hmm.
If I can get some clarity.
Okay, Tina, would you like to see it at pre-budget or round one budget?
We can put it as pre-budget because the agenda doesn't go out till Friday. So I think that would be good, because what we're doing there is also providing more clarity on the funding sources.
Okay. And then how do we want to, I haven't looked at the wording again that was provided to us. Any suggestions for the wording for what we're actually looking at setting this function up as? Yeah, Director McMahon?
I'm thinking about a social services function. I realize that that's pretty broad. It's awkward because we're using the word social services, using the word services in a different sense than the SCRD uses service. But off the top of my head, I can't think of anything better.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Director Hiltz.
Yeah, that was the blank that the CFO we're trying to fill in that blank. I'm okay with social services. It feels a little bit out of RD's kind of lane. Community feels a bit more closer, and it was already in the recommendation. So either way for me doesn't make a difference.
Okay, when you're ready, Tara, we'll have you read us something else back.
Thank you, Chair. And staff report to November pre-budget with a proposed initiative for a feasibility study for the establishment of a new community service, and any requirements for any AAP process.
I think it's too early for the AAP part, Tina. So that piece can come out. Tina, what would you like to suggest here?
Yeah, I think essentially the first part, removing just the AAP process. It's that staff be approved to provide a pre-budget proposal or for feasibility of a social service is what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm. The establishment of a new service to fund community social services.
Perfect.
Okay, do you want to hear what we've finally come up with before we vote? Or before somebody makes the recommendation? Tara?
That staff report to November 2020 Special Corporate Administrative Services pre-budget meeting with a proposed initiative for a feasibility study for the establishment of a new community service function.
It'd be a community social service function, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. And Sherry?
Thank you, Chair, and that the recommendation be forwarded to the October 22nd board meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Director McMahon?
I move that.
Okay, could we have a seconder for the recommendation? Second. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor? Thank you. Awesome. So we are at 11:05. Does anybody need a break? Yes? Okay. How much time would you leave? 5 minutes? 7 minutes? 5 minutes? All right. 5-minute break. Back in 5 minutes. It is 11:05. We'll be back at 11:10. And we're back from our short break. We're moving on to Annex E, number 6, pages 30 to 48. This is 2020 Rural Areas Grant-in Aid Debrief. Tina, did you want to say a few words?
Brief words, yes. I as part of the grant and aid process, we have a debrief afterwards. And as part of what was discussed in the last intake was potentially having 2 intakes and a few other comments related to the policy. So those have been included as part of the discussion notes for today. And staff have also included a copy of the policy as well as the application documents for the community groups. So open for any discussion pieces.
I'm sure there'll be a few. Director McMahon.
Page 31, I see, given the nature of the deliberations and the board's interest in fairness to applicants, staff suggests a full review of the grant and aid policy at a special meeting for this purpose. If we are going to have another meeting for this purpose, I'm not going to dive right into the weeds.
All right. Director Hiltz.
I think the staff recommendation for a full review, 16 amendments in 19 years, I think is probably a record in terms of a policy with the regional district. So yeah, I think it's time for a full review and to kind of straighten it out a bit. Yeah, so I'm in that camp.
All right, would someone like to make a recommendation? Director McMahon.
Sure, what the heck? Yes, that we conduct a full review of the rural grant and aid policy at a special meeting for that purpose.
Is there a seconder? Seconded? All right, I guess one of the questions I'd look to staff on, do you want us to indicate some kind of timing for this? Okay. And what would you suggest, given we're just going into budget? If we're looking to have any kinds of changes impacted in this current budget year, is that feasible, first of all? And if so, what would that potentially look like? How quickly would we need to get something like this together? And do staff have the time to prepare for something quickly?
My suggestion would be that we do something before the end of this year. From staff's capacity, it would be sometime in late November, early December is what my suggestion would be. Of course, we would check back with the powers that be on booking a special committee, because I think this would be a special corporate and administrative services committee. We actually don't have one scheduled, a corporate and administrative services in December, so we could go in and take a look. That would be my suggestion, because typically, if we want to make sure there's clarity from community groups, we'd want to get this done as early as possible. Without knowing what is being contemplated for a quote-unquote full review, time will tell, I suppose.
Okay, and do you want that reflected in the recommendation put forward then?
I think prior to the end of 2020 would be generic enough for us to give us some flexibility.
Okay, Director McMahon, would you like to make that amendment?
Yes, I would love to make that amendment.
And it's been seconded. All right, any further comments on the amendment at this point? No comments on the amendment. This will be electoral areas only voting on this. All those in favor of the amendment? Thank you. And then any comments, questions on the recommendation on the floor? Director McMahon.
Personally, the largest thing I can see is going to a second intake, which I don't think would have a large financial implication, but would possibly have a staff implication in terms of managing it. I'm not I'm not seeing a lot of discussion items that would affect the bottom line of the budget heavily. That's just my take.
Okay, Director Hiltz?
Yeah, at this point, the second intake, there is an overhead to that. This is a 20-year process that people have been, so I think clarity of the policy, and then if we need to go to 2 intakes, because my concern is about how much do I reserve in the first intake versus the second intake, and doing it once a year with the amount of money that's there seems to be sufficient, and there is within the existing policy, there is provision for late items under various categories. So I'm, as Director McMahon, I'm not getting a lot of people saying I want a second intake. It's clarity about when it happens and how to apply. That's what I hear about, right? The process of getting it through. But not at this point, I'm not hearing any jumping up and down for a second intake.
Okay, Director McMahon?
Actually, I like the idea, but I would be interested in knowing from staff how many emergency applications we get typically outside of the regular cycle. So if we're getting a lot of extra applications that are a lot of work for staff anyway, then a second granting cycle makes more sense, if you see what I mean.
And is that a conversation that we could have at that special meeting?
I was just thinking that the information on that, if staff wanted to look up how many extra or emergency grants have been in the past, then that might be helpful to inform the conversation when we have the meeting.
Thank you. All right, any other questions, comments on the recommendation on the floor? This is rural directors only. All those in favor? Thank you. All right, we're finished page 1. Number 8, Annex G, pages 51 and 52. This is Director Constituency and Travel Expenses, July to September 2020. No, did I miss something? No, we did that, sorry, yep. Getting myself confused because we changed the agenda around. So Annex G. And is anybody speaking to this, or we just want to see if there are any questions or comments?
From my perspective, just any questions there might be, Chair.
Okay, any questions? Director McMahon?
I assume that any unspent funds go back to reduce taxation. They're not carried forward. Is that the case?
So typically what happens with that is it would generate a surplus in the 2 functions where these particular expenses lie. So in general government in function 110, as well as function 130. So those would just typically roll over into reserves.
Okay, Director Ties? Oh, sorry, Director McMahon, did you have a follow-up?
Would that be a travel reserve or just a general government reserve?
It would go towards the operating reserve.
Okay, Director Ties?
Yeah, just yesterday in agenda review, there was some discussion about doing partial cell phone bills and partial and other partial expenses like internet, and whether we could claim them or not, and whether people are claiming them, and just wanting to raise awareness to that one.
Okay. I think the conversation was that, when we initially got elected, most of us, we were presented with the policies, and we may have read them, but there were a lot, and it's been a steep learning curve. So what is covered? What isn't covered? What are eligible expenses? What aren't eligible expenses? Are we claiming what we should be claiming? And this goes to Director McMahon's comment a number of times where, the hours we put in, we don't necessarily, it's very, very minimal per hour. So if we're actually subsidizing, for things that we are doing, we should know that. So it'd be more like, and then I think our CAO commented that as part of the remuneration work that's being done, some of that is looking at, what is covered, what should be covered, how should that be paid out, those kinds of things. That's being done on the side. What we're looking at this point is we have a policy. What is the policy, and how do we actually implement that currently? And that would be something that could be, for example, one of the things I said, if you look at the District of Sechelt travel expenses, I think Director Toth probably put something in, but I said that last year I sat down and I listed every meeting in the year that I attended. And because I live so close to the regional district office, the total for the year for me would have been $250. And it would have taken me hours of work to put all of that together. I just said, it's not worth it. My time is more valuable other places. I can get paid more than that other places than for claiming for $250. So I just don't even do that. Unless it's something off coast, I'm okay with doing that, but otherwise I don't even do it. Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. The same thing came up at the council in Gibson's this week. We are allowed a remuneration amount for cell phone and internet, but one of the issues that one of the councilors brought up is the amount of work that goes into getting your cell phone bill, getting your internet bill, copying them, filing them. It becomes sort of, is it really worth the effort? And what was proposed, which is not a bad idea, that a sort of an amount be set that is actually paid with, it's just budgeted. This is, on average what cell phone and internet bills are, and that it just be paid as a flat amount, saving staff a bit of trouble and, the individual directors and councilors.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's something that is permissible with regional district budget structuring or not.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Director Schultz mentioned earlier about efficiencies of spending, and if it can become a more efficient method of dealing with some of these costs, I would certainly be in support of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we're talking about two parts here. One is, what is the policy we have now? Are we using it as it should be used? And then this next piece is tied into the remuneration work that's being done right now by the community group on looking at remuneration for the regional district. So if we got together, it wouldn't be at this point to look at how do we change it. It would be, what is it? Are we using it the way it should be used? Director Pratt, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Just to tag on to a little bit.
Sorry, it's hard to hear you right now. Maybe.
Okay, how is
That's
that?
better. Thank you.
Okay. So just to tag on a little bit to what Director Kroll said, for example, at the school district, what they, when I was elected there, I provided my internet bill once a year as backup for the auditors, and then it was just paid out on a monthly basis of $35 a month. And so that's how that worked there. I think it warrants a larger discussion on around what we are using our constituency expenses for. Some things are very clear. If I'm holding a public meeting and needing to rent a facility or needing to advertise for that, I mean, that's very clear if it's something within my constituency. If I'm traveling to the regional district office, that's very clear. If I'm attending a conference that I've been authorized by the board, either by board motion, that's very clear. And I think one thing that which, having traveled last week outside of our jurisdiction and being in another province and using a significant amount of data in order to do work associated with my position here, it became very clear to me, just in the last couple of weeks about how much we actually do use internet right now, phones, and even if you do have a plan, all of us, or the majority of us, are using our personal cell phones to complete our work, or people call us at home. Constituents call us at home because that's a publicly available number. There is that personal, our personal devices and our personal other accounts are getting used for constituency business. So it just needs to be in recognition of the fact of that.
All right, Director McMahon? No, you're on mute.
Sorry. First, I just wanted to confirm that the expenses falls outside the parameters of the current review of directors' pay. Is that the case?
I'd look to the CAO for a comment on that.
Hi, thank you for the question, Director McMahon. Are you asking whether or not the constituency expenses particularly are being covered off in the remuneration review? It was slightly out of scope in the original terms of reference. It's an area that the remuneration committee has started to look at in terms of what are the other regional districts doing specifically. The original scope did not include a comprehensive look at the constituency expenses. However, we are going to be discovering what is happening in the other regional district with that, and it could lead to formulating some recommendations.
That would be great, and I think that when the report comes back to us would be a really good time to have this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
The covering off of constituency expenses is part of the piece of accessibility of public office for people who don't have a lot of income. And so I think it should be discussed, but maybe not today.
Okay, so I guess the question would be, are directors looking at getting clarity around our current policy that we have to ensure that we are looking for reimbursement for those things that we should be looking for reimbursement on? Or not? I mean, it would be a workshop on that, or what would you like to do? Director Pratt?
I would just like to say that that's probably a conversation that we can just have as a workshop until the remuneration review does come in.
Well, Director Hiltz?
It's the last 24 months have been kind of foggy at times. So a chance to review kind of where we are, and are we doing doing what's expected of us too. Like, I'm in terms of myself, right? How to use the money that's available, which is given through the taxation process, and make sure that I'm pushing it out the door, right? That's so it's also, I think, partly as we have moved through the term, particularly for myself I'm not calling myself newly elected. I'm calling myself first term now. As a 50%, I can't say I'm newly elected. That's where I'm standing now. I'm my first term, but I'm still learning. So so a future conversation. Yeah.
Okay, Director McMahon. Okay, and we can't hear you.
I don't know. It keeps jumping around. I'm happy to leave, put 2020 to bed as it is, and then move on from there.
So I'm not seeing a consensus that yes, you want to have a workshop on this. No, you don't want to have a workshop on this. Director McMahon, then Director Hiltz.
I would like to have the conversation at the time that the report comes back from the committee, which is going to be December, I believe. So perhaps we could do a workshop or some follow-up to that at that time.
Okay, so not looking at the 2020 expenses that have gone out to see, okay, and just looking forward, okay? Director Hiltz?
Yeah, I'm good with that. And, you know, as part of that review, there will be documentation that's going to come forward. And so we'll be able to, you know, have information to digest on that. So including our own SCRD policies to make sure we got the right one. You know, the expense one goes back to 2004 when it was first created. So, you know, to make sure we got the right versions, you know, that will come through with when this report comes back. So yeah, that's what I'm expecting, is that we'll have documentation that shows us where we are currently.
Okay, so I'll go to the CAO. Is it December that we're anticipating that this information is coming forward?
We don't have a date finalized, but the goal was to have the report coming forward by the end of December. And what I can do is, I was just going to send a note to myself and Tracy to ensure that we have a bit more of a formal discussion at the next Remuneration Committee meeting about the constituency expenses and how we can weave that into the remuneration review in a more formal basis, as it wasn't captured in detail and scope. And we also note that the last revision to the constituency expenses was also back in 2014. So it's very timely to include it now.
All right, thank you. Any further comments or questions on this at this point then? Don't see anything. Let's move on to item number 9, contracts between 50 and 100,000. This is Annex H, pages 53 through 54. Any questions on the contracts? Or on the report? Not seeing any. Let's move on to communications. This is from, we've already received this. This is from Julie Nash Davidson with regards to some plans that the Sunshine Coast Trail Society has. And my understanding is that Julie Davidson is actually in the gallery. I know Director Ties during the agenda review had some questions he forwarded to staff, and that was a response we got back, that she would be in the gallery and could potentially answer some of those questions for us. Director, I've got, the order I've got is Director Lee and then Director Ties. Sorry, Director Lee, we can't hear you yet.
Oh, I must have been unmuted and then muted myself. I apologize, but I actually had a question on the previous item. I noticed on page 53, is it okay if I go backwards a little bit?
Sure.
Oh, okay. I noticed there's 2 account codes, like 352, for instance, as an example. Together they go over 100,000. So I'm wondering how you decide which ones to bring before the board and which ones you don't. Is it just simply because they happen at different times, or what's the being an old budget guy? I'm curious.
Tina?
It's decided per the purchasing policy and as well as the delegation authority. So any contracts over 100,000 the board would typically see.
So the answer is they're 2 separate contracts. Thank you.
Okay, Director Ties.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, my question is around the infrastructure that is being planned in the B&K parking lot. And my questions are: who's going to build it? Who's going to maintain it? And who's going to remove it if funding is no longer available? And those are my questions, and I maybe Julie can be promoted into the group so that we can have a chat with her.
We actually can have her just speak right from the attendee. Oh, well, here she is. Bring her forward. It works. So Julie, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yep, there. Thank you.
Thank
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Thank you very much. I hear your questions. Thank you. I wish I had some definitive answer for you at this time. It's early in this process, and the application is due next week, but there's still some unanswered questions. We are in discussion with BC Hydro, but we've not had a confirmation back from them that they will actually allow it. So that is one of the points. The other is whether we do a more simple version of a porta potty rental, which is a contract that is easy to initiate and also easy to terminate, or whether we do a more permanent structure with in sort of keeping with BC Parks and other regional park facilities. So at this stage, I think what we would present in our grant application is options A and B. I wish there was more time to actually explore it further. The timeline on this application process has been rather fraught. It was very short. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure if there was a third part to your question. Maintenance.
Yes, ongoing maintenance. I guess one of the things that we are always looking at is if something is implemented, at some point, does it fall to the regional district to continue on with that? Right.
And I understand that. And that's my concern too, because as an organization, as a volunteer organization, we have limited capacity to manage something like that too. I do know that it's something that the community would benefit from. I think it's definitely needed as a hub for mountain biking trails, and all the user groups sort of launch from there. I think we do need to have it now. Whether we can pull it together in time for this grant application is yet to be seen. As far as ongoing funding of maintenance, we do have sources we have individual contributions, we have contributions from the community, from businesses, but I don't have firm figures that I could attach to that. But what I could say is that I don't think the Sunshine Coast Trail Society would sign onto, I can guarantee that we wouldn't sign onto a grant application without having something formal in place.
Okay, Director Hills.
So further on the sort of jurisdictional and the ongoing liability, the tenure of the land, is this a BC Hydro right away? Is it Crown land? What is the status of, I don't know the site.
It is BC Hydro right-of-way. We have an MOU with BC Hydro in the parking area. It does not at this time include washroom facility per se, but it does include the kiosk and the parking area.
Follow-up?
Is there any anticipated like land clearing or excavation to be happening on this site? Is that part of the proposal?
Just recently, actually this week, as part of our understanding with BC Timber Sales, when they pulled out of the area, they agreed to grade the parking area to improve it. It was very hazardous, and they have done that. Part of this project will also see some improvements to that. I think it needs some gravel, but no, I don't think there will be any further clearing required at this time.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Yeah, this is a very well-used area. I've been there a couple of times lately, and there were lots of people there. And the kiosk is really good with the trail map and everything. So I would be happy to move that we write a letter of support for this grant application and that it be moved to the board meeting this afternoon.
Thank you. Is there a second? Seconded? Okay. Director Lee, speaking to this.
Yes, I'm a little bit behind in the whole thing here. I was wondering, are we proposing a pit toilet, or are we proposing to rent porta potties that have to be serviced? And I'm assuming that this grant will only be for 1 year. So after 1 year, whatever is left there, someone's going to have to look after not only look after, but keep supplied. And so how's that all going to work? Is that actually in the application or?
Right. Sorry.
Go ahead, Julie.
Yeah. I think, as I was saying, I think there's a porta potty option, or there's an option to do a more permanent fixture. We won't proceed with the project either way without having the clear ability to continue to service it.
Director Lee, did that answer your question?
Yes, I guess.
Okay. So there is a recommendation on the floor, and this is voting all directors. All those in favor? Any opposed? Director Hall, or GM Hall, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So staff have been working with the Trail Society, providing in-kind support to their development of this application. And it's the type of in-kind support that we always provide to the Trail Society by sharing information, mapping information, etc. So staff would suggest, as it would build on the intent of the recommendation just passed, that an additional resolution authorizing staff to continue to provide in-kind support as part of this project relating to information sharing and mapping would be helpful to the Trail Society, as they'd be able to include it in their application.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, Director Ties is moving that. Director Lee, everybody's seconding it. Tara, do you have that? And that would also be forwarded to the board meeting this afternoon. Thank you. All right, all those in favor? Thank you. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to item number 11. This is printed in your agenda. This is a motion for which notice has been given regarding business licensing in rural areas, and this is from Director Ties. So I'm going to turn to Director Ties to speak to this.
Thank you, Chair. And well, we asked for it in a UBCM motion, and with the minister meeting, they sounded like they were receptive to the idea. And I guess now it's time to discuss what we asked for. And I think the next step would be to at least have a look at what it would actually entail to, and what the repercussions are of asking for it. One, in staffing; two, in for the rest of the business in the rural areas that currently don't need a license, and as well as future implications to things like short-term rentals and potential new policies around cannabis and such things. So, yeah, the motion, you can find it, I believe, just under the agenda cover. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that's so we'll see where this discussion goes.
Okay, so I have a question following up our other conversation about the function and feasibility studies and funding feasibility studies. I looked at Tina. Do we need to do anything with this around budget and funding and a pre-budget meeting? Over to you.
I think it depends on what stage of exploration we're going to look at now. And again, just refreshing my memory on what service this, if a new service would have to be established. That I don't know off the top of my head right now. I think if between now and the agenda distribution, we believe, and if this motion passes, then staff can take that offline and address it appropriately.
Okay, thank you. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I don't know if it needs to be stated, but we should find out what other regional districts have done. We know that there is only one other that has business licensing, but have other regional districts done feasibility analysis like these and decided not to go with business licensing? So, you know, if we don't have to invent the wheel, let's not.
Okay, I'm going to go to our CAO.
I can speak to that a little bit. I sent an email around to all the regional district CAOs asking who has explored business licensing. Has anyone other than Central Okanagan implemented it? Pros and cons. Do you have some research you could share? Anything you can share with us would be helpful. Based on the responses I've received back, I've got a couple of documents. I'll be meeting with the CAO from Central Okanagan Regional District, Brian Reardon, next Wednesday, it looks like, to discuss their business licensing program. And the only other regional district that was currently had any kind of direction to pursue this was actually the Regional District of East Kootenay. And so I've invited Sean Tomlin, my counterpart at East Kootenay, to participate in the discussion with myself and Brian next Wednesday. So there's not a lot of research out there. The vast majority of regional districts have not pursued this, and I'll be able to put a bunch of information together after I have my meeting with Brian and Sean next Wednesday.
Okay. Director Lee?
I think, thank you, Chair. I think our CAO has put my mind at ease. My area's got a long history of not being entirely receptive to policing things such as a dog bylaw. And I think pretty well know what the reaction would be if we suggested a blanket business license. But it would be interesting to see if you can just license some kind of businesses and leave the rest alone. So those kind of things, I believe, will come out in our CAO's report when he talks to districts that got it and have contemplated it. So thank you.
Thank you. Director Hiltz?
Yeah, so there's the timing issue, which is when we're expecting it, and I am interested to know what, and I guess this will come whether it's a program or a service, and so I'm just getting some of the language like service, feasibility, program, feasibility, kind of. It'd be just nice to have some clarity around, like, what are we talking, a feasibility? We're essentially asking for information. I think at this point we're not talking about feasibility, so I'm just worried about that word feasibility because it relates to services. So as long as staff is clear that we're looking for information, not leading down the road to creating a service. So I'm just want to put some boundaries on that report, kind of, and the timing issue.
Okay. So wording, first of all, feasibility, I understand what you're saying. I mean, I think that's what had me go down the, do we need a budget proposal for this, right? So maybe a little change in the wording in that, so that everybody's clear about what we're looking for. Director McMahon?
How about implication?
That staff prepare a report about the implications of introducing business licensing in SCRD rural areas. Okay. Right, and we have a motion on the floor already. Is it been put on the floor, or has it just been introduced? Just introduced at this point? Okay, cool. Perfect. Okay, and then timing. So, CAO, other staff, whoever is going to be coming back with putting a report together, when do we anticipate, and what would you like in the motion, if anything?
It's hard for me to know, having not had the conversations yet, to know exactly when I'd be bringing a report back. It would be me bringing it back, so to be brought back at a future appropriate committee meeting, and I'll endeavor to have that done before the end of the year.
Okay. Would you like that in the recommendation then? So I'm going to look to Director Tighe, since he brought this forward, and have you put forward a motion.
Yeah, that sounds good. I guess we'll add the implications, and we'll also add before before New Year's celebrations commence.
Before the end of 2020, okay. So that recommendation's on the floor. Is there a seconder for the recommendation? All right, any further comments or questions? Director Hills.
So it was to strike the feasibility and insert implications rather than
Yes.
add implications. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, good
Yes.
with that.
Okay. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor? Thank you. Awesome. Any new business? Not seeing any staff waving frantically at me. Next is a potential motion to move in camera. That would be subject to 91C and K of the community charter. Would someone like to move that recommendation? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And any questions from the gallery? Connie and Sophie? I don't see any hands up. All right, we will move in camera. And I have to find my agenda, which I printed. Here we go. Thank you. We are back in open meeting for the Corporate and Administrative Services Committee meeting of Thursday, October 22nd. No further business on our agenda. I would look for a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. All right. We will see you all back at 1:30 at the board meeting.